Thank you, Roger. You got a lot to watch out for. Art Douglas is sitting here in the second row, so first of all, it's great to be here, but I think you need to give a big, rousing round of applause to Roger and Don and their staffs for putting on such a great convention again. Give them a big round of applause. You know, Roger, I've been in your shoes before, and you're always nervous. Speakers will be on time. The food gets delivered. Everybody's got a place to stay, so I know what you're going through, but it's just been fantastic. Peggy and I got here on Sunday, and it's literally and figuratively kind of like a family reunion. My brother's here. Maureen's here. My lovely wife of 36 years, Peggy, and I have really enjoyed seeing everyone again. In fact, Peggy and I were talking on the way out, and I said, Peggy, in your wildest dreams when we first got married and lived in that little four-room house in rural Indiana, did you ever think that we'd end up in Washington, and I'd work for 2 United States senators and a congressman for 11 years, get selected and hired by Farmers Union to run their Washington office? In your wildest imaginations, you ever dream that I'd be president of the greatest farm organization in the world, or run a biofuels trade association that's trying to help farmers in this nation and worldwide? In your wildest imagination, Peggy, did you ever believe that? And she said, no, Tom, you've never been in my wildest imagination. You know, we just celebrated our 36th wedding anniversary. 37 may not be coming down the road there. Roger mentioned that when I left Farmers Union 8 years ago, almost to the day, I went to Growth Energy, which was a startup ethanol trade association. And we had a handful of ethanol producers who really wanted to move the ball forward in advancing the use of biofuels and higher blends. The first week I was there, we filed a petition to allow E15 into the marketplace. And it's been a long, hard struggle to get it into the market. Part of those struggles, as you might imagine, come from the oil industry, who's fought us every step of the way. But the RFS and the Renewable Fuel Standard, which most of you are familiar with, but if you're not, it's been a tremendous success. It's not only helped generate farm income, it's created jobs, about 400,000 direct and indirect jobs. Jobs here in the United States that can't be and haven't been outsourced. It's revitalized rural communities. You know, there's a new report out by one of our members who has analyzed the economic impact in those rural communities where an ethanol plant exists, and it's about $250 million annually. It helps create a tax base that provides for revenue to the local counties and communities for the infrastructure that's necessary to keep our communities viable, such as schools and hospitals and roads and other infrastructure needs. We reduced our dependence on foreign oil. We've reduced our dependence on fossil fuels and helped clean the air. We're about 40% or over 40% less greenhouse gas emissions than gasoline. We're now 10% of our nation's fuel. And that's kind of the sticking point, because that 10% used to belong to the petroleum industry, and we've replaced that. And that's what this fight really is all about. It's a fight over market share. And at the same time that we produce ethanol only 1/3 of that kernel of corn goes for the production of ethanol. Another third is carbon, but the good stuff in that kernel of corn for livestock, the fiber, the oil, the protein, gets returned in a co-product called distillers' grains. And distillers' grains are a high-value feed source. And as great as the RFS has been, we got work to do. Our work is never done on this. Every year, oil and their allies try to eliminate the RFS, modify the RFS, or stall the progress of the RFS. And as sure as the sun comes up in the east, they're going to try again this year. As we all know, the political climate changes after elections in Washington. The president, President Trump, campaigned in Iowa extensively in his support for the RFS and continuing the RFS. But it seems like a lot of the appointees to key positions come from people that may not be favorable to ethanol. So we have to be diligent and make sure that the president lives up to his support and his administration does. But in Congress, we always have a problem in the House of Representatives. They will push to eliminate the RFS again this year. And we will have to try our best to block that. We've been successful in the past with your help and your support, and Roger and his team's outstanding work and your work when you come on the fly-ins. We've not lost. We continue to be able to move forward. But we know our critics are going to spend millions. As I mentioned, we're 10% of the nation's fuel source. And we know we can do better. Our opponents know we can do better. We got approval for E15. That is basically 90% of all the vehicles, gasoline vehicles, cars, and light-duty trucks in America can legally run on E15. We have seen large retailers, and, most of you have met my brother, but he's always telling me about, we got to get that neighborhood gas station down the street to put in a blender pump. And that's great. But that little gas station near our farm probably sells 100 gallons a month. And so what we did at Growth Energy, because we weren't getting retailers to move forward on offering higher blends, is we put together $70 million. We got Secretary Vilsack and the Obama administration to put another $100 million into infrastructure changes. We sought out the largest retailers in the country, retailers like Sheetz and Come and Go and Thornton's and Racetrack and others, ProTech, who have now started over the past year to install blender pumps. A lot of people call them blender pumps. I call them flex pumps because a few years ago I was going to a grand opening to a grand reopening of an ethanol plant a couple of miles from our farm in Indiana, and I didn't have time to go by the farm. I always like to go by there and check to see and correct my brothers on what they need to do to make the farm more efficient. And so my younger brother picks me up at the airport. He takes me and I give a speech, and on the way back to the airport he said, I hear you talking about blender pumps. Does that mean I can get a milkshake or margarita when I fill up? And I thought about that all the flight back to Washington and for the next 3 or 4 days, and we were having a board meeting, and I said, hey, we need to improve our messaging. I told him the story. So we started calling them flex pumps. And the reason flex pumps makes a lot of sense is it gives maximum flexibility. And all these retailers that I mentioned through Prime the Pump and the BIP program that are installing higher blends, they're doing so with flex pumps. And that means today they can offer E15, which is approved, legally approved for all the cars, low-hanging fruit that we can move into. And tomorrow, if we get E30 approved or E40 or E50 or whatever the number, they don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel and change the infrastructure. That's been a huge challenge for us. EPA, when they approved the E15, didn't take care of a lot of the challenges that we face both in the infrastructure. We have different requirements on pumps, different requirements on tanks. It's been a struggle, but we're finally clearing that hoop. And what that means, getting E15 into the marketplace for farmers, we all know supply and demand has to be balanced for you to receive a profit from the marketplace. If we have 1 gallon too much, 1 bushel too much, we get a cheap price on the whole crop, all your production. If we keep supply and demand into balance, we'll see what happened a few years ago for probably the most extended profitability ever in American agriculture. When supply and demand was in balance, you had a profit from the marketplace. You know, I've traveled this great nation. I've been to many farms. I've spoken to and met thousands of farmers, and every farmer or rancher I've ever met in my life wants a fair, profitable price from the marketplace, and we can help do that. Full adoption of E15 will equate to 2.5 billion bushels more demand for corn. That's about equivalent to the current U.S. overproduction. That's well over 7-8 billion gallons more of ethanol. And we can do it. We can do it. But we need your help. And I know that's not a tough ask because NFU has been there from the start. I remember being involved with the Indiana Farmers Union back in the 70s. We called this stuff gasohol. Truth be known, it wasn't energy efficient. It wasn't economically efficient. And our little secret was most of our expertise came along the Ohio River from legal and illegal stills. But we've come a long way. U.S. ethanol production today is the cheapest production in the world. We produce ethanol cheaper than Brazil, which starts out with an advantage in the sugars. These plants continue to become more efficient. Every year, the production, the yield from a kernel of corn goes up in the production of ethanol. Our energy usage goes down. Our water use goes down. Our contribution to the environment goes up, and the cost comes down. There's very few industries that can say that. And if you want to draw a comparison with the petroleum industry, all the new finds that they've had for oil in fracking and other modern technology is more expensive. So their cost is going up, ours is going down. We are homegrown, we are clean, we are cheaper. How can you top that? What do you think? There's a couple issues, though, sticking points that will really help us get more of this into the marketplace. One is this issue called point of obligation. When the RFS was created, they had to have some mechanism to account for how much fuel was going into the marketplace, how much renewable fuel, both ethanol and biodiesel. And they created an identification number. They call them renewable identification numbers. They have to be, the obligated parties have to turn those into EPA annually to show that they're meeting the compliance of the RFS, the volume requirements. Those RINs, as they're called, are kind of like when you sell a car, the title goes with the car. When we sell the ethanol, the RIN goes with the ethanol to the person who's going to, or buys it and who blends it. That point of obligation since day one of the RFS has been with the refiners and those doing the blending. started out, these RINs, you could also be they could be traded. So if one company couldn't meet their obligation, they could buy RINs from a company that exceeded their obligation. That started out, those RINs were 2 cents each. And a few years ago, as we started to run up against the blend wall, those value of those RINs went up, which is an incentive for refiners to blend higher blends for ethanol. And when they went up, a few refiners who chose not to blend, they made a business decision: we're not going to blend, we're just going to buy RINs. Started squealing like stuck hogs. And when they kept squealing, and they're continuing to squeal. And there's this billionaire Wall Street investor called Carl Icahn. He bought a refinery. He owns over 80% of CVR Refining. And he happened to be a close personal friend of the new president. And he continues to say, we got to shift the point of obligation of these RINs from the refiner to the fuel rack at the terminals. And that would mean shifting the obligation from those refiners who chose not to blend. It's almost like my brother choosing to plant all corn when soybeans were higher. That's a business decision he made. It turned out to be a bad business decision, and that's why they want to shift this. There are even some within our industry that claim to want to go along with some secret deal at the White House, which the White House denied, that would be a foolish move at the wrong time and catastrophic to us getting higher blends in the market. I don't care if it's E15, E30, E85. Retailers would not have the incentive to blend, and they've all stated that. That word catastrophic came from them. I didn't make that up, although Art Douglas put that in my speech to make sure that I took credit for it. So it's a huge roadblock that could occur. The White House denied they were working on any secret deal, but we have to be diligent in making sure that that doesn't get changed in the future. And the second issue that's really important to getting higher blends into the marketplace is this issue called reed vapor pressure. And when they blend and when you pump fuel, there's some Reed. It's not named after Harry Reid or Walter Reed or any of those, but it's the reed vapor pressure that comes out. That Clean Air Act has standards. And the standards are you have to meet a 9-pound reed vapor pressure requirement. And I know I'm getting a little in the weeds here, but hopefully this will make sense to you. Also in 1990, when they passed the Clean Air Act, Congress gave a waiver for E10, 10% ethanol, of the reed vapor pressure. So it can be pumped year-round. The summer months are the more volatile months in the air, and so Congress exempted E10. When EPA gave Growth Energy the approval on the waiver for E15, they said they could not and did not have the authority to give E15 that same waiver, that Congress would have to do it, even though every percent of ethanol that's increased in the fuel lowers the reed vapor pressure. But it doesn't cross that threshold until you get about to E50. And so what we are pushing, and again, Roger, we need all your troops and all your help, is to get Congress, which legislation's been introduced both in the Senate and the House recently in this new Congress, to pass the reed vapor pressure exemption for E15. Again, it's cleaner for the environment. It'll allow us to sell and the retailers to sell E15 and higher blends year-round in the summer driving months, which ironically are the high volume usage month. So that's really important. I told Roger I was going to try to help him out and get within the time limit here. I'd prepared a 2.5-hour speech, but I want to close again by thanking Farmers Union for all you do. You have been at the forefront, not just for our industry, but since 1902, for all of American agriculture. You are the representatives of family farmers. You never give up. Good years, bad years, so-so years. You've always rose to the challenge. You know, in Washington, one of the best lines I heard, there's workhorses and there's show horses. And the show horses may look good, but it's the workhorses who get the job done. Farmers Union's a workhorse. Those fly-ins, all you do year-round in your communities, in your states, and nationally, pays off. You can always look to you to have the correct answers and the direction that this country needs to move on food and fiber policy. You're not shy. You never have been. I know as you go through the policy debate, you'll see how nobody's shy. And you remind me, and I've used this before to describe Farmers Union. The late Robert Kennedy once said, some men see things the way they are and say why. Others dream things that never were and say why not. That's Farmers Union. I have had... Me personally, I've had one of the greatest honors in my life to be involved with Farmers Union and serve as your president, which I still consider the greatest farm organization in the world. We're going to win. You're going to win. None of us are going to give up, and we're going to turn this downturn around again. Been doing it since 1902. It's going to happen with your help. Thank you all very much. God bless you all, and great to see you.